the desert outpost of Red Mesa sat like a lonely thought at the edge of the world. A handful of sun-bleached buildings clung to the hard earth, their shadows stretching long and thin beneath a merciless sky. Travelers came through for water, feed, and rest, but few stayed longer than necessary. The desert had a way of pressing people forward, urging them west or back the way they came. Every evening, just as the heat began to loosen its grip, a violin sang beneath the outpost's crooked awning. Annie Bell sat on a wooden crate outside the trading post, her boots dusted white, her skirts patched but clean. She tucked the violin beneath her chin, as if it were something alive and fragile. And when the bow touched the strings, the desert listened. Her music wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It drifted soft as wind over dunes, aching as a memory you didn't know you still carried. Travelers paused mid-step. Teamsters leaned against wagon wheels. Even the horses seemed to lower their heads. Annie played for coins, mostly, sometimes for food, sometimes simply because the silence felt too heavy to bear. The violin had belonged to her mother, carried across plains and rivers until it reached this dry stretch of nowhere. Annie had promised herself she'd keep it singing, no matter where the road took her. The outpost keeper, old Mr. Harlan, claimed her music brought luck. Since you started playing here, he'd told her once. Less trouble, more trade. Annie smiled at that, but never argued. Music didn't change the desert, but it made surviving it feel possible. As the last notes of her song faded into the amber light, a rider approached from the east. Annie noticed him before she saw his face. The horse moved steady, unhurried, like it trusted the ground beneath its hooves. Dust clung to the rider's coat, and the brim of his hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes. He stopped a few yards away and stayed there, listening as if the music had anchored him in place. Annie finished her song gently, letting the final note dissolve into silence. She lowered her bow and looked up. The man tipped his hat. His eyes were the color of weathered steel, calm but alert, like someone who'd learned to read danger early and often. "That was fine playin'," he said. His voice was low, roughened by sun and wind. "Didn't expect to hear something like that out here." Annie nodded, unsure what to say. Compliments came often enough, but they still caught her off guard. "Name's Ford Hale," he added, dismounting. "Just passin' through, Annie," she replied. "I play most evenings." Ford glanced around the outpost. "Hard place to stay put." She shrugged. "Hard places need music too." That earned a faint smile. He reached into his pocket and placed a coin in her open violin case, more than most gave, not charity. Payment, fair, and deliberate. "Where you headed?" he asked. "West," Annie said, the word carrying more weight than direction. Eventually, Ford nodded, as if that made sense. "That's where most folks are going. Desert don't give you much reason to linger." As he turned toward the water trough, Annie watched him go. Unsettled by the strange certainty, she felt like the first note of a song before it fully reveals itself. That night, the desert wind carried her music farther than usual, threading it through tents, wagons, and restless dreams. And somewhere beyond the firelight, Ford listened again, unaware that the sound of a violin was already beginning to change the shape of his road. Morning came pale and cool, the desert briefly forgiving, before the sun reclaimed its rule. Annie woke to the sound of wagons creaking and voices murmuring outside the small room she rented above the trading post. She rose quietly, packing her violin with care, her fingers lingering on the worn wood as if drawing courage from it. She told herself she had no reason to think of Ford Hale, yet when she stepped outside, there he was, tightening a strap on his saddle, movements efficient and unshowy. He looked like a man shaped by miles rather than years. "Morning," he said, spotting her. "Didn't mean to wake you if I did." "You didn't," Annie replied. "Outpost doesn't sleep much." Ford nodded toward the horizon. "I'm heading west today. Trail cuts through Drybone Pass. not the friendliest stretch. Annie felt her pulse quicken. Drybone Pass was narrow, and unforgiving bandits sometimes lingered there, preying on lone travelers. She'd planned to join a wagon train eventually, but none were heading out for days. "I was planning to leave soon too," she said carefully. Ford studied her, then glanced at the violin case. "You travel alone?" "Yes." That gave him pause. "That's risky." She met his gaze. "So is stayin'." A corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile. "Fair point." They stood in silence for a moment, the desert holding its breath between them. Then Ford cleared his throat. "I could escort you as far as Silver Bend," he offered. "From there, roads get busier, safer." Annie's instincts warred with something deeper, quiet pull she didn't fully understand. She'd learned to be cautious, especially with strangers. But Ford's offer carried no pressure, no expectation. "What's in it for you?" she asked. He shrugged. "And music, like yours, deserves a better road than this one." That settled it more than she expected. They left Red Mesa before the sun climbed high, Ford riding beside Annie's small pack mule. The land unfolded in long, empty stretches, sand giving way to rock to scrub. Conversation came slowly at first, like water coaxed from dry ground. Ford spoke of ranch work gone wrong, of drifting from job to job after a drought killed his family's land. Annie shared stories of playing in river towns, of her mother teaching her music by firelight. "My mama said, music reminds people they're human," Annie said, as they rested beneath a crooked mesquite tree, "even when everything else tries to strip that away." Ford considered that. "Guess that explains why folks stopped to listen." As the day wore on, the heat thickened, pressing down on them. Near Drybone Pass, they found the remains of an abandoned camp, cold ashes, broken crates. Ford's hand moved instinctively to his revolver. "Stay close," he murmured. They passed through without trouble, but the tension lingered. When they finally reached open land again, Annie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That evening, they made camp near a shallow wash. As Ford built a small fire, Annie lifted her violin. "You don't have to play," he said. "You must be tired." "I want to," she replied. The music rose into the darkening sky, softer than before and timid. Meant for one listener, Ford sat quietly, hat in his hands, eyes reflecting firelight. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel endless. When the last note faded, Ford spoke. "You ever think about settling down?" Annie looked toward the stars. "I think about belonging. Not sure that's the same thing." Ford nodded. "Maybe not." The fire crackled between them, and the desert seemed less vast, less cruel. Two travelers, drawn together by chance or something that felt an awful lot like fate. The second night on the trail felt different. Not safer, exactly, but familiar, as if the desert had accepted them for the moment. The wind softened after sunset, carrying the scent of sage and warm stone. Ford finished tending the horses, while Annie unpacked her violin, her movements slower now, unguarded. They ate in companionable silence, the fire throwing small sparks into the dark. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its cry thin and lonely. "You play like you're token to someone," Ford said at last. "Like the music's got a destination." Annie smiled faintly. "Maybe it does. Maybe it's talking to whoever needs it most." She began to play, again, not for coins or travelers this time, but for the quiet between them. The melody was gentle, winding like a slow river through sand. It carried longing, yes, but also hope. Ford leaned back against his saddle, eyes fixed on the stars, as if the music were stitching old wounds he'd long ignored. When she finished, he exhaled. "Haven't heard music since my sister passed. She used to hum while working the fields." "I'm sorry," Annie said softly. He nodded. "Life keeps moving, whether you're ready or not." They talked late into the night, about places they'd seen, about roads that led nowhere, and roads that surprised you. Ford admitted he'd once planned to head farther west, to California. Maybe Oregon, but the years had a way of wearing down dreams until they felt impractical. "And you?" he asked. "What are you looking for out there?" Annie hesitated. "A place where I don't feel like I'm borrowing space. Somewhere the music belongs." Ford studied her in the firelight. "You make it belong." The words settled between them. Heavy with meaning, neither dared touch fully. The next day brought trouble. They were riding through a narrow stretch of land when dust rose ahead fast and deliberate. Ford's posture shifted instantly. "Riders," he said. "3, maybe 4. Annie's heart thudded. "Bandits, likely." Ford guided her off the trail, behind a low ridge. "Stay here. Whatever happens, don't run, unless I say." She clutched her violin case, fear sharp and sudden. The riders passed close enough that she could hear their laughter, rough and careless. One slowed, scanning the land. Ford stood, hand resting near his gun, calm as still water. After a tense moment, the riders moved on. Annie let out a shaky breath. "Thank you." Ford crouched beside her. "That's why you don't travel alone out here." She met his eyes, realizing how close they were. For a heartbeat, the desert fell away. They reached Silver Bend by late afternoon. Small but lively town, nestled near a river. Green and startling against the brown land. Wagons lined the streets. Voices and laughter filled the air. "This is where I said I'd leave you," Ford said. Annie's chest tightened unexpectedly. Yes, she played that evening in front of the saloon, her music drawing a crowd. Coins filled her case. Smiles followed her wherever she went. Ford watched from across the street, pride flickering in his eyes. Later, as the town settled into night, Annie found him by the hitching posts. "You could stay," she said, before she could stop herself. "There's work here. Music needs listeners." Ford shook his head slowly. "I don't think I'm done moving yet." She nodded, though the truth of it stung. "Well," she said, lifting her violin, "wherever you go next, carry this with you." She played one last song just for him. Soft, resolute, full of unspoken promise. Ford tipped his hat. "If our roads cross again, Annie Bell, I'll be listening." As he rode out under the moonlight, Annie watched until the dust settled. Unaware that the desert wasn't finished weaving their song, Silver Bend welcomed Annie more warmly than she expected. The river brought life to the town cottonwoods lining its banks. Laughter spilling from porches, and children chasing one another through the dust. Each evening, Annie played outside the saloon, or near the market square. And each night, her violin filled rooms with something the desert had taught her to treasure. Resilience. But even as her reputation grew, a quiet absence followed her. Ford's empty place beside the hitching post lingered in her thoughts. She told herself it was foolish to travelers, sharing a stretch of road, nothing more. Yet, every time she lifted her bow, she felt the space where his listening had been. One afternoon, trouble came dressed as opportunity. A sharply dressed man named Calder approached her after a performance. He claimed to manage entertainment for a wealthy caravan heading west. "Good money," he said smoothly. "Steady crowds. Protection too." Annie hesitated. Something about Calder's eyes made her uneasy. But the promise of safety and steady income tugged at her practical side. "I'll think on it," she said. That night, the music wouldn't come. Her fingers faltered, the melody breaking apart like footprints in wind-blown sand. She packed her violin away early and walked to the river instead, letting the sound of moving water steady her. 2 days later, the caravan departed with Annie riding among them. The trouble revealed itself quickly. Calder's protection was thin, his promises hollow. When bandits struck near a canyon crossing, chaos followed. Horses reared, wagons scattered. Annie ran, clutching her violin, heart pounding as shouts echoed behind her. She stumbled, the case slipping from her grasp. The sound of wood cracking against stone felt like a blade to her chest. A gunshot rang out then. Another. "Annie." The voice cut through the noise like a lifeline. Ford rode in hard and fast. Dust flying, revolver raised with deadly precision. The bandits scattered under his fire, disappearing into the rocks. When it was over, Ford dismounted beside her, concern etched deep into his face. "I should have known you'd get into trouble without me." She laughed shakily, relief spilling over. "You followed me, couldn't shake the sound of that last song," he admitted. "Figured I'd listen a while longer." They recovered her violin. The crack in the wood was small but painful, all the same. "I don't know who I'd be without it," Annie whispered. Ford touched her hand gently. "You'd still be you." They camped together that night, closer than before. Annie played, despite the damage, the sound rough but honest. Ford listened, eyes never leaving her. "You don't have to keep running," he said quietly. "I found work at a ranch, not far from here. Stable work. Room for music." Annie swallowed. "And you?" "I'm tired of empty miles." The fire burned low as the truth settled between them, simple, frightening, and full of promise. The desert had tested them. Now it waited. The ranch sat at the edge of the desert like a quiet promise kept. Weathered fences traced the land, and beyond them, open fields rolled toward the horizon, softened by grass and sky. It wasn't grand, but it was honest, like the life Ford had finally chosen to stop running from. Annie arrived just before sunset, her violin repaired as best the town craftsman could manage. The crack remained visible, a pale scar along the wood, but the sound, though changed, was still strong, maybe even stronger. Like her, it had learned something from being broken. Ford met her at the gate, hat in hand, the same steady calm in his eyes that had first drawn her in at Red Mesa. "You came," he said, almost as if he hadn't allowed himself to hope. "I did," Annie replied. "Turns out West wasn't a place. It was a moment." They settled into a rhythm that felt natural, earned. Ford worked the land from dawn until the heat drove him indoors. Annie played in the evenings, sometimes for ranch hands, sometimes for neighboring families who gathered with lanterns and laughter. Music drifted across the fields, no longer lost in sand, but rooted in something living. One night, as the stars brightened overhead, Annie played the first song she'd ever written, just for this place. It carried the ache of the desert, the danger of the road, and the quiet certainty of choosing to stay. When she finished, Ford stood and walked toward her. "I spent years thinking freedom meant never stopping," he said. "But I was wrong." Annie lowered her violin. "What does it mean now?" He took her hands, rough palms warm against her skin. "It means walking beside someone who hears you." The kiss was gentle, unhurried, like the opening note of a song you know will stay with you long after it ends. Seasons passed. The desert still loomed beyond the ranch, vast and unforgiving, but it no longer felt like an enemy. Travelers came through, drawn by rumors of music at sunset. Annie played for them sometimes, her violin singing of roads traveled and roads chosen. And when the music ended, she always returned to Fordsteady, waiting home. Because hope, like music, carries farthest when it finally knows where it belongs. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.